I think I might have liked Frank Miller more back when he didn't like Superman. Hey everyone, it's me, Aaron, and welcome to another episode of Comic Class, the show every single week on this channel where we just geek out about comic books. And today on Comic Class, we're covering Superman Year 1, Issue Number 1, the latest from DC's Black Label line, and as far as I know, the only book coming up from DC's Black Label line not starring Batman, or a Batman-related character. Even though it's being written by the most famous Batman writer of all time. Is it too late to change this line to Bat Label? Like, I know that's kind of obvious, like, the Arkham line, maybe that'd be a little bit more vague, maybe, like, give us a little bit more wiggle room in there. I'm just throwing that one out there, DC. You can keep that one right there. Yeah, this is a weird one, and we're going to get into that. But before we do, I have a little bit of house cleaning that I need to do. You guys might have noticed that we did not have an episode of Comic Class last week. That is because we have another channel called Thorgy's Arcade. It is a video game channel, and last week was E3, the biggest video game conference in the entire world. Not that you would know it from this year's E3, but it did mean that I had to put out almost a video every single day. I don't mean I skipped days, I mean there were days where we had to put out 2 of them. It was kind of big. So if you want to see any of the stuff that we did last week, a card will be popping up for that other channel right now. We are going to have a lot of stuff over there that you might be interested in, such as a complete breakdown of that new Avengers game trailer, including some of the reasons why people are concerned about that new Avengers game. I might be one of those people. Also, if you want even more comic book related stuff from us, we're going to have a brand new episode of Thorgy's Picks coming up tomorrow. Yeah, we haven't done one of those in a long time, but we're bringing that show back. It's the show where I just talk about comics that I love, just recommendations that I think you guys should be reading. So it's just going to be loaded with comic book positivity and excitement tomorrow. However, if that is not enough comic book fuel for you guys, you can sign up for our Patreon, because this week they're also going to get their own secret second episode of Comic Class. So I'm gonna be kind of comicked out after this week, but if you guys want to check it out, that's where you can find even more comic book stuff. Is there any other things that I can say to fill up time to keep me from talking about this issue? How long can I take a sip of this drink? Not long enough. So, okay, let's go ahead and get into this. Yes, there is a new Superman origin story, however, it is not part of the main continuity. That's why it's part of the Black Label line. The Black Label line where creators can come on and just tell whatever story they want about these characters. They don't have to worry about being rated all ages, and they don't have to worry about tying into continuity. They can just do whatever they want with these characters. And Frank Miller decided that he was going to tell his own version of the Superman origin story, and this had a lot of people concerned because Frank Miller has kind of been famous over the years for not really understanding Superman and writing Superman in a way that makes people actually ask, so do you hate this guy? Like, I mean, it really feels like you think this guy is awful. Like, it really just feels like you view him as the symbol of like totalitarianism and just this big, dumb, ignorant oaf and just, yeah. That's kind of the feeling we've gotten from his versions of Superman in the past. However, I was not that concerned about that. If you guys have watched this channel for a while, you know that I'm not going to say I'm protective of Superman, but I do kind of care about the way that he's represented. But I was intrigued by this because right before this, Frank Miller came back and he wrapped up the, let's call it a trilogy, of his Dark Knight books with DK3, which is all about Bruce Wayne returning to run the Donkey Kong crew and keep K. Rool from stealing the rest of his bananas. Now, you guys all know what DK3 was all about, and if you don't know, it wasn't that important. But it did involve something at the end that I found interesting. Because basically, Superman was sitting around just, had completely separated himself from the rest of humanity. He was in his Fortress of Solitude, just there basically as a statue, frozen there, refusing to move. He had cut himself off completely from all humans. And then at the end of this thing, he comes back around, and in this Dark Knight series, he comes in there and he just saves the day. Like almost instantly, And it basically goes from where at the end of the first Dark Knight book, you've got Batman going up against Superman. Here at the end, you've got Batman looking at Superman like, no, that guy's really special. That's the Superman that I know. And then the whole thing wraps up with Superman talking to his daughter about how it's important to rejoin the rest of humanity, about how it's important to not fly, but to walk among other human beings and to become one of them. And I read that and I went, it kind of feels like DK3 was meant to be his apology for the way that he had written Superman in the past. It kind of feels like the entire reason why he wanted to come back was because he looked at the way that he had written Superman in the past and went, I was wrong about this. I need to come in here and correct that. So when I heard that he now wanted to tell an origin story of Superman, and it was going to try and be the most human version of Superman that we had ever seen, and all about his personal connections and not him being Superman but him being Clark Kent, I was like, yeah, it really feels like Frank Miller kind of learned his lesson and he's trying to make up for stuff he's done in the past. So, okay, I'm intrigued to read this. And I'll say this, Superman's not like a monster in this. He is a good person. We do see Superman being, a good guy, and we see him being human. We see him establishing connections with his parents. We see him establishing connections with Lana Lang. In fact, I'll go ahead and say that right now. I think that the stuff between Lana and Clark in here, aside from one particular thing that I will dance around later on in the video, I think that most of the stuff between them is the strongest stuff in this. There's a moment at the end of this where Clark Kent is leaving Smallville, and you just have that really close personal connection between the two of them, and you see how, yeah, it's kind of breaking both their hearts that they have to say goodbye to each other, and yeah, you really get that feeling of young love coming off the two of them. Yeah, I think that was excellent. And there's some decent stuff with his parents in there, and he forms this collection of friends at school, and I enjoyed that. That's about all I can give this thing. Okay, let's go ahead and get into this thing. So, this book suffers from a couple of problems. And one of them is that this is Frank Miller trying to be more poignant and more poetic than he has ever been before. And wow, it really kind of feels, I do not want to use this word to describe someone who has been in the industry for this long, but it feels amateurish. Like, it feels like when a film student tries to make their first artsy film and it's just a picture of a flower with a black and white filter on it and just someone going live, and then just one petal floats down very slowly and you look at it and they're expecting massive applause, but you're just like, that was just, what the hell is that? There is so much in the dialogue and so much in the internal narration, which, by the way, I'm never even 100% sure who the narrator is in this thing, because for the vast majority of this book, it's referring to Clark Kent in the third person, but every now and again, it will be referring to him as me, and it's not like it's going, Clark thought to himself. No, it just suddenly talks that way. Like, it's not a lot in here, but there were like one or two instances where I was like, wait, hold on a second. Did we switch narrators and I wasn't aware of this thing? But there's so much in here that is repetitive because it is trying to hammer in there how important this scene is. I'm going to start off with how this book opens up. It opens up with the destruction of Krypton, and there's a moment in there, I'm going to try and get this right without looking at, but it was basically, there are bursts and explosions like a celebration. But that's what this is, a celebration. There is so much excitement happening, like in a celebration. That is what happens within like one box. And you get stuff like that all throughout this book. It's so repetitive with its dialogue, but not in that way that, like Tom King or Brian Michael Bendis is repetitive with their dialogue. They do that to try and make it seem more natural or kind of to give their book a tone. The repetition in here constantly feels like they're just trying to hammer in the importance of this scene. And it really just kind of makes this feel, like I said, kind of like beginner film student levels of writing. Like it really feels like somebody who's like, ah yes, this is how important dialogue is written. Not really. Instead this just kind of comes off feeling like someone had a word count that they had to hit and they're just trying to stretch it out. Because this dialogue, well, not the dialogue itself. The dialogue I'll get into in a moment. I mean the narration. The narration itself is so dry and it just keeps feeling like they're filling in. It all feels like they just had to put something in there, so it's just like, fill it in with more. Just put more words in there and just make them important words. Big important words. Everything in here, from the narration to the verbal dialogue between characters, it feels like they took every word in the dictionary and just used a random number generator to figure out which one would go where, because there are moments where it's like, this is the most important big dialogue you've ever heard, and then the next bit of dialogue would be completely meaningless and pointless and be like, that doesn't sound like what that person who was just saying would be saying this bit of dialogue. Same thing kind of goes for the narration, except the narration at least has more of a consistent tone, and that consistent tone is dry. It is very dry, and this book, because it was so dull and so dry, it just felt like it was going on forever. I kid you not. This is real. It took me about 3 hours to finish the last 5 pages because I was just in that home stretch. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I am just done. And I did that all throughout the book, but I would like amp up that energy, go, all right, I got through 10 pages. Let's get back in there. Let's see if we can get through another 10 pages here. And when it got to that last 5, oh my God, that was that last stretch where you just collapse. Because I would read a page and then I'd be like, all right, I'm kind of done now. I'll come back to this in a second. And then I would be about to set up the camera to start recording. And then I had to remind myself, oh my God, I didn't finish the book. I gotta go back to the book now. And again, as I said, there's a very lovely thing between Lana Lang and Clark Kent there towards the end. And that was really the only thing that was like hanging on to there at the end. Because aside from that, I was done with this book. And it just kept going and going. Yeah, this book, it's dull. It is really dull. And every time that tries to be really big and important, it's hammering into you how dull it is. But I will say this. It at least does kind of feel like a Superman origin story. But that's another problem with this, is that I look at this and went, okay, well, Frank Miller, he feels like he needs to tell this story. He feels like this is his Superman origin story. He needs to come in here and tell the story of Superman. I was like, okay, well, clearly he's going to have something different in here. He's going to have something unique about this version of Superman that is going to make it a must-read. That makes it so important that he had to tell this story. And man, this is just by the numbers Superman stuff. There is nothing really interesting or different about what happens in here up until a certain moment. I kept reading this and I kept thinking to myself, wow, I'll say this, it doesn't feel like Frank Miller is writing this, because I was expecting this book to have something horribly wrong happen at some point in time in here. But it hasn't. I mean, it's not interesting, really. But nothing really horrible has happened in here yet. But why the heck is this a Black Label book? Like, Black Label, it's their, like, adult line. It's the line where they let the creators come in here, not worry about making this all ages safe. And I guess that also means just giving the creators freedom, and if the creator doesn't want to make this an adult-themed book, then they don't have to. But it really feels like that's kind of the running thing with a lot of the other things we've gotten so far from Black Label, or at least what's planned coming up for Black Label. So, okay, it just kind of feels weird that this had to be Black Label. I don't know why. And then all of a sudden there came a racial slur in there, and I was like, oh geez, well, it's a bully, it's a bad person saying it, but you didn't need to say, that could easily have been left out of this, you didn't need to do that at all. And then it keeps going, and there comes a moment where the bullies find Lana Lang outside of her house, and something is about to happen there. And Superman shows up and stops it, and I'm not going to say what it was, because I know that that is a very sensitive topic for many people out there, so I'm not going to go into any more details, but this book really kind of goes into some details. Like, it spends a solid chunk of time on the build-up to this thing about to happen before Superman saves her, and oh man, that just left an awful taste in my mouth. Like, up until that moment, I've been reading this book going, well, it's not very interesting, and it's stuff that I've seen numerous times before, and this dialogue and this narration is really dull, and it's keeping me from getting really invested, but at least nothing awful has happened. At least it didn't feel like we got that grim, dirty look at the world that Frank Miller is kind of known for, and wow, there it goes. Just all over the place. Alright, so that's now happening. Great. And as I said with the dialogue, how you would have some characters say one thing that was like this, and then they would say another thing that's like this, and be like, oh, that doesn't feel like the same person said both those lines right there. That's kind of what this scene was. It was that this entire book had this one certain tone going the entire time, and then this thing came in here and was like, oh my god, that doesn't fit in with the rest of what you have been writing this entire time. It really kind of feels like Frank Miller, yeah, he's been kind of criticized justifiably for a long period of time of he likes to write things a certain way in his own crazy Frank Miller way. And it feels like for the majority of this book, majority of this book, he had been tapping that down. He had been keeping that in check. He had kept that raging demon from coming out. And then there just came that moment where it was like, no, I can't contain it any longer. And it just came out there in that moment. He just looked at us like, oh my god. This, yeah, again, if it was any other writer, it still would have been a problem. But the fact that it's coming from the guy who we know really enjoys writing stuff like this is like, oh god, you just couldn't help yourself. You just couldn't help yourself at this moment, could you, man? Yeah, it's a very problematic scene for many reasons, but I want to make it clear, that's not like the one thing that happened in here. I was like, well, clearly this book is terrible. There's a lot of reasons why I didn't like this book. That's just one of many in there. So let's move away from that, shove that aside, and never talk about it again. God, I hate that even was a thing in there. So, one of the other problems I have with this book is that this is supposed to be the story of how Clark Kent learned to be Superman. It's how he learned about his morals, how he learned to be a good person. And there's stuff in here that kind of works for that, but then there's other stuff in here that makes it seem like he was just a robot that was programmed to automatically be good. It doesn't feel many of the times in this book like the teachings that his parents gave him actually had any impact on him. Like, he was already just set to go. Like, when he arrives on Earth, he is walking out there with the cape around him, with his, baby blanket on, and it looks like they're leaning into that Jesus metaphor pretty heavily in here, because he walks out of there. He walks out of the little pod that he got sent to Earth in, like with the robes just draped over him, and he's standing there with his hands out in front of his father, and yeah, not very subtle. Not very subtle. You want to, like, take him to church and have a big stained glass Jesus behind him the entire time. But Jonathan Kent picks him up, and then the narrator goes, Jonathan Kent feels something in his brain, like something just lifted up his brain from inside of his head. He decides to take the child home. The child says, let this feel like it was his idea. Oh my god! Oh, that felt, oh, okay. Is this Brightburn? Is that what I'm watching here right now? Because you look at that moment and it doesn't feel like Jonathan Kent was like, oh my god, this child is, we have to take in this child and keep him safe. And oh man, it's an angel, it's a miracle coming down. It's what we've been wanting this whole time. And oh, I'm going to take such good care of you, child. It feels more like this farmer Kent was like, what the heck is this thing? Yes, master, must raise baby. It was so weird, but because of that, because of stuff like that in the beginning, they have it almost feel like Clark Kent is some super genius baby who already knows Jor-El's mission for him to come to Earth and protect everyone. So it doesn't really feel like his Earth parents Jonathan and Martha Kent were really all that important at all in this whole equation. But the rest of the book also kind of makes it feel like that, because there's many times where Clark has like this big moral quandary, and his dad or his mom will come to him and they'll kind of say something, but it doesn't really feel like that has an impact on anything. In fact, many of the times they'll have a moral quandary and they don't say anything, or there will be a moment where he kind of acts out in a certain way and the parents do nothing about that. Like there was a moment where he is playing football and he decides, you know what, just this once I'm gonna use my powers. And he just charges through and he's getting tackled by the whole team and they can't stop him. He makes it all the way through, and then you just see his parents in the stands like, So you look at that and you're like, oh man, they're going to have a big, stern argument. They're going to have a conversation, a very serious conversation about when it is okay and is not okay to use those powers. That never comes up again. At all. Done. That's it. Never comes up again. That is never brought back. And there's many other things in here where it has to do with how he's dealing with these bullies at school. And I will say, one thing that actually is kind of good about this is that Superman, he's having to learn when to use his powers and when not to use his powers. There's a moment in which he kind of uses his powers a little bit, just a little bit, against these bullies to get them to stop picking on his friends. And then he ends up getting 10 days of detention, but also the bullies are now like empowered. They start hurting his friends even more. They start beating his friends up even more after this. They start going in there and like spray painting all over the place, like making fun of their friends and targeting them even stricter. And Superman then has to realize, well, shoot, I did something and it made it worse. And you look at a moment like that, it's like, okay, that's a good thing right there. That is a good scene of Superman having to realize when to use his powers, when not to use his powers, and also how to use his powers. That there are going to be situations where just him going out there and just using physical force, it's not going to be the thing that helps. He's going to realize that there's some enemies that you can't just defeat in a certain way. He's going to have to realize what it is to be in an unwinnable situation. Yeah, that was a great thing for him. And then later on, he rescues Lana from that thing. I guess we're bringing it back in here again. He rescues Lana from that thing, and then the bullies just never do anything. Like he comes in, charges, flips them all over, and then that's it. They're never really a problem throughout the rest of this book. So I guess physical force did save the day in the end? The thing that caused it to not save the day earlier on? Yeah, it's the messages that they go for in this book are kind of all over the place. So this book has dry narration, dialogue that's all over the place. It's got pacing that is, I haven't even mentioned the pacing yet, but it's just completely jumbled up. Like there are certain things that will be set up and then we never get back to that because we have now jumped ahead by, I'm guessing, maybe years. You can never tell how quickly time is moving at a certain point in this book. And there's so many things that they set up at one point like it already happened, but it hasn't. Like for example, when Lana Lang is introduced, people are going up to her and going, oh yeah, your boy Clark over there. And he's like, what makes you think that he's my boy? And I was like, I don't know, because you two haven't interacted yet. Why is everyone talking like you two are dating? Because I don't even know if you two have met yet at this point. Like, is this how you two meet? People just naturally assume that you were dating each other? Why would they assume that when you two haven't actually interacted? And I don't even know. I don't know. So yeah, those three things really combined together to make this thing just a drag. Like, it was rough getting through all 60 pages, and not in like a groan-worthy way. Not in a like, oh my god, this is terrible. But more of like when you watch a movie that is overly artsy. Like, it reminded me of when I watched Tree of Life, which I know some people loved, and I'm sure some people are going to love this book. I've already looked up the reviews online for this thing, and oh man, you're talking about something being all over the place. I saw like 3 perfect 10 out of 10s for this thing, and then I saw like a 1.6 was like the lowest score. And it wasn't like 1.6, 8, 9, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. No, it was like 1.6, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 5, 6. And then like, it was just like this evenly paced, like full rainbow of emotions. So that's something I have to come in here and make clear. This is going to be something that some people are going to absolutely love. But all I can really give you are my opinions on this. And yeah, I saw a lot of problems in this thing. And it didn't make me want to come back to this thing. I have no interest in coming back to really give you guys an opinion on how this thing wraps up. I have no feelings about continuing this, but I will say I'm kind of intrigued to see what comes in the next chapter, simply because at the very end of this, they finally do something different with Clark Kent. As I said, one of the big problems with this is that you read this and you just go, there's nothing really that justifies another Superman origin story in here. There is nothing in here that makes me look at it and go, why was this the story you had to tell? But at the end of this, Clark Kent decides that rather than deciding to go to college after he graduates, he's going to go into the Navy. And that is actually something different. Clark Kent never joined the armed forces. He just was straight from high school to college, as far as I know. And then he walked the earth for a little bit, depending on your interpretation of Superman. So he's going to join the Navy in the next issue. And that actually has me curious about what they're going to do. Not in an excited way, but more as in a, you're doing a lab test and you want to see what the results are going to be kind of way. Because one of the things I enjoy about reading comics is how you can look at the writing and see it as a window into the mind of the creator, and how you can kind of use that as like a therapeutic diagnosis of the person writing it. And as I said, one of the reasons why I was intrigued by this book was because Frank Miller was kind of known for writing Superman in a way that made people think they hated Superman. But then he kind of turned around on Superman, which is why he wanted to write this book. Frank Miller has also been all over the place when it comes to his views on the armed forces. And I'm looking at this like, oh, Superman's going to join the Navy? I'm really kind of curious as to what Frank Miller is going to do with that storyline, because there's so many ways that that can go. I don't really know how many of them could possibly be good, because nothing in this issue gave me really any hope of the rest of the story being good. But I am kind of intrigued from a diagnostic standpoint to see how Frank Miller will interpret that story. Yeah, it's gonna be a ride. So, thank you guys very much for tuning in. Let me know what you thought about this issue down below, or you know what, let me know what your personal favorite Superman origin story was in the comments down below. My personal favorite was Jeff Johns' Secret Origin storyline. That is really darn good. Go and check that out. But yeah, let me know all that and more in the comments down below. And you can also follow me around the web on Twitch and Twitter at Professor Thorgy. And like I said, if you want that second episode of Comic Class, then you can go to our Patreon at patreon.com/Professor Thorgy. And we will also have another comic book video for you guys tomorrow on this channel. We got so much planned for you guys. I am making up for missing out on last week, so I hope that you guys enjoy that. Thank you guys very much for tuning in. Come back next time. Bye.